Welcome to On This Day in Tudor History with me, Claire Ridgway, author of On This Day in Tudor History, as well as a few other history books. Now, I've still got my throat and nose thing going on, so apologies for any spluttering or swallowing or anything nasty and horrible. But here I am anyway, I'm going to carry on. On this day in Tudor history, the 23rd of January 1571, the Royal Exchange in London was officially opened by Queen Elizabeth I. Contemporary historian John Stow recorded the opening in his book A Survey of London, and I'll share that with you now. He writes of the opening taking place in 1570 rather than 1571. But that's because in Tudor times, the new calendar year started on Lady Day on the 25th of March. Those Tudors, they just like to try and catch us out with that. Here's what John Stow wrote. In the year 1570, on the 23rd of January, the Queen's Majesty, attended with her nobility, came from her house at the Strand called Somerset House, and entered the city by Temple Bar through Fleet Street, Cheap, and so by the north side of the Burse through Threadneedle Street, which is Threadneedle Street, to Sir Thomas Gresham's in Bishopsgate Street, where she dined. After dinner, Her Majesty, returning through Cornhill, entered the Burse on the south side. And after that, she'd viewed every part thereof above the ground, especially the pawn, which was richly furnished with all sorts of the finest wares in the city. She caused the same Burse, by a herald and a trumpet, to be proclaimed the Royal Exchange, and so to be called from thenceforth and not otherwise. The Queen opened the Royal Exchange, as Stowe just said, after she'd dined with its founder, Sir Thomas Gresham, at his home, Gresham House in Bishopsgate. A.E.W. Mason, in his 1920 book, The Royal Exchange, cites the French ambassador, Monsieur Lamotte Fenelon, as stating that he sat on the Queen's left hand, while Gresham sat on her right. Stowe explains that building work on what would be the Royal Exchange had been started on the 7th of June 1566, when Sir Thomas Gresham, who he describes as knight, agent to the Queen's Highness, laid the first stone of the foundation, accompanied by aldermen who each laid a piece of gold. Stowe explains how the building was to be a burse, a place for merchants to assemble in, i.e. a trading exchange, a centre of commerce. Sir Thomas Gresham was a merchant and financier who'd been based at Antwerp in the 1540s. He also worked as Elizabeth I's agent in the Low Countries. He modelled his exchange in London on the Burse of Antwerp. The City of London Corporation and the Worshipful Company of Mercers provided the land in the ward of Cornhill, and Gresham paid for the building. In his book Crash Bang Wallop, the inside story of London's Big Bang and a financial revolution that changed the world, Ian Martin explains that by building the exchange, Gresham was seeking to give something back. Martin writes his only son had died young, and the opening of a burse gifted to the city was an act of philanthropy. Although the rents from the shops overlooking the courtyard helped him to recoup some of his expenses. Mason writes of how the Royal Exchange became at once the meeting place of merchants and the promenade of men of fashion, that by day it was a place for serious business people to adjust their disputes and engage in transactions with people from all over the world, and then in the evening the butterflies of fashion would flit from Paul's Walk to the gaily lighted shops of the Pawn, the Exchange's shopping centre. Unfortunately, Gresham's Royal Exchange was destroyed in 1666 in the Great Fire of London. Samuel Pepys recorded in his diary, "The Exchange a sad sight, nothing standing there of all the statues or pillars, but Sir Thomas Gresham's picture in the corner, i.e. his statue. How sad." The present Royal Exchange is the third exchange to be built on the site, and was opened by Queen Victoria in 1844. If you want to know more about Gresham, a fascinating Tudor man, you'll be interested in historian John Guy's book, Gresham's Law. I'll give you a link to my video from last year so that you can find out what I talked about last year for On This Day in Tudor History. And you can subscribe to this channel by clicking round about there, and you can hit the bell to be notified as these videos go live. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. And the opening of a burse gifted to the city was an act of philanthropy.
Good word.
And the opening of a burse gifted to the city was an act of philanthropy.